So when it comes to multiplayer and single player games, both of those niches have their huge communities. You know, there are people that only play multiplayer games and that have their 1 or 2 games that they play all year round. And then you have the guys that only play single player games. And then you obviously have those guys that just don't give an F and play whatever they want to. And well, I was one of those guys. A couple of years ago, I had a lot of single player games that I absolutely loved, but I was also playing a lot of multiplayer games, maybe even more than single player ones. But a couple of years ago, well, I made the decision to quit playing multiplayer games. And the reasons for that are mostly not very obvious ones. You know, I won't be talking about the general stuff like, yeah, multiplayer games aren't as fun anymore. No, today we're digging deep and I'll tell you my serious reasons why I stopped playing multiplayer games and pretty much only play single player games today, and why it might be actually a good idea for you. And so guys, now I want you to think about, what did our parents always tell us when we were small and when we were playing video games? They mostly said, yo, you're wasting your time. But always, even when I was getting older and older, I didn't really see it as time wasting, you know. Like when I was playing The Witcher 3 and I was living through these incredible stories, I didn't really feel like there was a waste of time. Because, you know, playing those 1 or 2 hours a day after a productive or hard day really was a great way to wind down and relax properly. But one time I was thinking about it, I was a very passionate Counter-Strike Go player. I had around 3,000 hours, global elite, and I have been playing the game for literally years. Like I started the game when I was 12 or 13 and literally played it until the age of 18, 19. And once I was sitting there, literally thinking about the 3,000 hours that I had in Counter-Strike Go. Because The Witcher 3, with all of its DLCs and all of its incredible stories, takes about 100 hours to complete. And I was thinking to myself, I spent 30 times more time in Counter-Strike Go than I spent in The Witcher 3? And I literally couldn't believe that in the moment. And that was the moment where I literally thought, okay, maybe our parents were right when looking at it from that perspective. Because out of the 3,000 hours, you don't really remember much. You know, there are some memories that you do have that are very fond and very happy, but still when I thought about it, I could talk about a single player game where I spent 50-60 hours in, way more than I could about Counter-Strike Go. And 3,000 hours being such an incredible amount of time. I mean, over 4 months, think about it. You would literally learn like 10 basic skills to that time. But here for the first time I literally felt like, okay, maybe there is something about it when it comes to the wasting of time. Because, I mean, you could literally play those multiplayer games like Battlefield, like COD, like CSGO. You could literally play them for thousands of hours. You could play them to infinity and they do not end. And that's a big aspect when it comes to single player games. Obviously they have their story, but those stories there end after 60, 70, 80 hours. And after it you have to figure out what you're going to do. But you see, everything that there is in those 70 hours, well, you could be playing the new COD for 5,000 hours, kind of mindlessly, with the time just passing by. And so another point that pairs very well with the time problem is that we get way more addicted to online video games than we do to single player ones. And that obviously has a lot of reasons why. The problem with the time is one as well. I mean, you can be addicted to a single player game, but I mean, after 70 hours, even if you replay it once, then there comes a point where you just don't really care about the video game and you move on. Well, those multiplayer games, they literally keep you hooked for thousands of hours, and you sometimes don't become bored because the dopamine that releases while playing those games is so high and so addictive. And let me tell you, I was hella addicted, probably from the ages of 14 to 18. I've never been addicted to something as much and as hard that I was to Counter-Strike. And after I quit those and started playing single player games, I noticed that I could kind of control myself way better. You know, I would literally tell myself, okay, I'll play the game for 2 hours and then I'll stop and I'll continue tomorrow. And when you're playing online games, I mean, it's way harder to stop. Obviously, you also have the big factor that you play with your friends most of the time, and they obviously tell you, dude, it's only 11 in the evening, why do you want to go to sleep? And then you continue playing until 3 or 4 in the morning while completely losing the sense of time. And so it's pretty clear that online games are way more addictive than single player ones, and that's also a big part on why I quit. And then when you think about which games tell the greatest stories, obviously the single player ones are in a completely different league. Like games like Red Dead Redemption, like Elder Scrolls or The Witcher, I mean, there's not a single multiplayer game that even comes close to those titles. And who doesn't like a great story? Obviously most of the people don't play multiplayer games because of the stories there, but that's just a big aspect and a big advantage that single player games have, and definitely worth mentioning here. And probably one of the most unnoticed but most dangerous aspects that multiplayer games come with, and that's really interesting. I want you to think about that very carefully, because think about it, when you used to play or when you play multiplayer games, you know, what are the reasons that we play video games in the first place? Well, probably one of the first things that comes to mind is, well, to wind down, to relax, and to just have a thing that you can spend your time with and wind down and forget all of your other problems. Well, think about it. When you play multiplayer games, literally it's the complete opposite. Like, I was raging literally every single day. I was freaking destroying my table, smashing my mouse or my controller. Dude, when you play multiplayer games, you have zero emotional control. It's literally crazy. And instead of relaxing and winding down, it is literally the complete opposite. I mean, your body literally thinks that you are in an extremely dangerous situation because your heart is pumping, you're nervous, you're raging all of the time, while you're only sitting at home and playing a game. And the psychological aspects when it comes to multiplayer games are, in my opinion, not talked about enough, because they literally give you this false sense of relaxation, while in reality they do the exact opposite. And when it comes to the accessibility, I mean, it's not really a big point in today's day and age, because, you know, everybody got Wi-Fi. And guys, think about the problem that we sometimes used to have with the ping. When you would have lags, it was literally one of the worst feelings in the world. Well, guess what? You don't have that feeling in playing single player games at all. You can literally have the slowest internet connection. Once you download a game, you pretty much don't really care about Wi-Fi, about your internet connection. You can play the game whenever you want. The accessibility is definitely also a big aspect and a big advantage that single player games have. Okay, and when it comes to the atmosphere and the open worlds that feature in single player games, same as with the stories, it's really not a comparison. If you also think about the best and most beautiful open worlds of all time, almost every single one of them is a single player world. And so the world building and the atmosphere are 100% a big aspect and a big advantage that single player games have. And now the last and, well, probably one of the most important aspects, maybe the most important one, why I quit multiplayer games, is the external pressure that we have. And when it comes to external pressure, I mean several points. On one hand, obviously there is the pressure that you kind of have to adapt when it comes to your pace. You can't really play the game at your own pace because there are certain standards, and when you're a guy that has played the game for a couple of hundred or a couple of thousands of hours even, and you're still in the lower ranks of the game, dude, you get so much hate in the game that really builds a lot of pressure. And I mean, you could play any single player game, you could play it for 500 hours and be an absolute noob. No one and nobody will care. You literally can decide yourself how you're going to play the game without having any external pressure. But more importantly, in my opinion, when it comes to the external pressure is that, well, think about it. When you play multiplayer games, what are your happiest and fondest memories? Obviously, it's when you play with your friends, when you play with people you like and you know and that you like to spend time with. And literally, when I think about the happiest times that I had in multiplayer games, it were those times where I was playing with my friends and we would meet up every single evening to play our favorite games. And I wasn't thinking anything of it until, well, there came a time where suddenly those friends stopped playing this game and sometimes even stopped gaming in general. And well, then you're there alone. And what are the choices that you have then? Well, you could try solo, which is probably a bad idea most of the time. But other than that, there comes this sense of, well, yeah, almost depression, where you had those friends, sometimes you didn't even know them in real life, and you spend all of those great memories with them, and they're just gone. And that's a big aspect when it comes to multiplayer games, is that your happiness and your luck are dependent on other players. You know, it's really tough to have proper fun playing Counter-Strike Go in solo mode, for example. And when you play single player games, I mean, you don't care, you know, you play alone, but you have fun. And obviously when you play with your friends, everything is great until it's not anymore, and there comes the sense of loneliness, and then it's quite hard to fit that hole. And that's also a big aspect that I appreciate about single player games. You know, I have my friends in real life, and I spend the time that I have with them doing real activities and real stuff. And when I'm playing, I don't really care who is online, I don't really care what's going on. I have fun at my own pace, and being happy and playing those games is not dependent on anyone else. And so, well, obviously, the atmosphere, the open worlds and the stories are a big aspect. Those kind of more psychological aspects and psychological reasons on why I quit multiplayer games are things that are not really talked about much in the gaming communities, and I know that a lot of other people had problems and mental issues regarding those things. And so if you also could kind of recognize yourself with the aspects that I just mentioned, maybe playing single player games isn't the worst reason. Now when I look back, I literally would like to have spent those 3,000 hours that I spent in Counter-Strike Go in other single player games or doing other stuff. Because, you know, while I did have a lot of great and fond memories, it doesn't even come close to the emotions that I felt while playing The Witcher 3, for example, or while playing Resident Evil, even though I only spent a fraction of the time in those games that I spent in CSGO. But as I said, whether you like single or multiplayer games more is, well, completely personal and varies from person to person. But those are just some reasons on why I quit video games, which in my opinion was a great decision, and it also could be a great one for you. But I'm very interested in hearing about your opinion on that topic, because, well, in Reddit or other social medias, I read a lot of stuff where people had very big mental problems while playing those multiplayer games, especially because of those external pressure points that I just mentioned. And how do you see it? Do you had similar experiences while playing multiplayer games, or do you still prefer online games and play them every day? Tell me your opinions down in the comments. I always love reading them and hearing about your opinions. Alright guys, that was it from me in today's video. I wish you all an amazing day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.